The Pure Loop AIO from Be Quiet features a pump in between the rad and the CPU block, making it quite applicable for different mounting positions, and now it gets a few improvements. Welcome to Machines More. As part of Be Quiet's 20th anniversary, they are launching a few products. And I was asked to take a look at this new AIO. It's the Pure Loop 2 FX. This is a new one that builds on the uniquely designed Pure Loop. And this will come in 240, 280, or 360 millimeter rad/fan options. I do have the new Silent Wings 4 and the 4 Pro, by the way, on hand. Sorry, the USA-bound test samples, they did hit a snag. So we, stateside here, we got them later than the release. So I will be doing that and a detailed test for all of you soon. So please expect that review coming up. And so a big thanks and happy 20th anniversary to Be Quiet. Full disclosure, this 240 millimeter version was provided for the review by Be Quiet, free of charge. But as with all reviews on the channel, I'm not paid for them. And you can expect a properly researched and informed opinion on this and all the products that I review on the channel. So we took a look at the Pure Loop not too long ago, and the selling point there was this mid-tube pump, right? Which means that unless you really go out of your way to mount it funny, rarely will this ever be the highest point in your AIO, and that avoids that noise, longevity concerns with air bubbles being caught in the pump. Because of that, you can use this in a radiator on bottom type of build, such as a vertical GPU build in the NR200 or other cases, or you can do a side mount like I'm testing here, and of course, top mounted rad, it's absolutely fine here as well, because the motor is more or less always going to be somewhere in the middle. The Pure Loop 2 FX can be thought of as an extension or a second version in this family, and it continues to build on that versatility while adding a few extra touches. First off, this pump is revised and it's now PWM controllable, so you can hook it up to a PWM header on your motherboard and control that speed. Previously, it wasn't egregious, but there was a noticeable hum to the Pure Loop and you couldn't just dial it down, right? And with many AIOs, it works absolutely fine to have the pump run at 60 to 70%, and you get the benefit of the reduced noise without too much of a thermal performance penalty. And same as before, this pump does make side mounting in a small case challenging or next to impossible. So if you've got something narrower like an NCase M1 or similar type of setup, this large block, it does limit the tubing capability, even though the CPU blocks absolutely has elbows for flexible tubing runs. Next, Be Quiet does jump on the Rgb Aio bandwagon here, and as much as I enjoy the business-like black theme that accompanies so many of their products, not having a flashy AIO potentially limits their market. So instead of a plain white LED in the CPU block like before, they've now added Argp Lighting. It's a ring around the CPU block. And instead of the Pure Wings fan on their predecessor, Be Quiet slaps on two of their Light Wings fan. Each fan has a PWM and ARGB cable coming out of it, and there is an included LED and fan hub that you can use. It's SATA powered, however, so take that into consideration. Same as previously, the refill port, which makes the unit user refillable, it's still present, and they do include that bottle of coolant, and this will keep the unit topped off as permeation occurs over time. And I like this approach to product design, since the longer the user can keep the unit in service, the less waste, the lower cost of ownership over the life of the product. The Light Wings fan has a single ring of LEDs. These are addressable, so you can adjust the lighting, including turning it off completely if you want. You can do that in the RGB software of choice. I connected these to my motherboard's ARGB header directly to get an idea of how the aesthetic is. With a single ring on just one side though, for the lighting to make sense, you're almost limited to one orientation. So if you were thinking of having the most prominent lighting effect in your build, you'll have to be okay with the fans exhausting. And so, for example, if you're going to be bottom mounting the rad, then you'll have to be okay with bottom exhaust. In many cases, regardless of the mounting position, intake tends to be the best configuration for airflow as a whole, so that is one consideration. The CPU block has a subtle ring of lighting as well. It's not over the top. I think even if you're not big on RGB, this isn't the worst offender. The rad here appears to be the same as the Pure Loop one. It's 27 millimeters. It's pretty standard for AIOs. And you have the braided lines of the pump, which is free to move along one of the tubes. And that gives the tubing some flexibility for movement. So getting into the nuts and bolts, the performance of the unit, when comparing against these other units, I did want to mount it in the same position, which is a side intake on my NR200 test system. And then, you know, it's a little more compressed in that position because of that pump and where it's placed in between tubing. And yeah, the noise equivalent RPM compared to the other fans is a bit higher, but it's just a nuance of this fan's design here. And testing with the OC3700X just for consistency here with prior results and compared to other coolers, at the +1 dBA noise level, it just trails the X53 and is ahead of the ML240 Illusion, so it's definitely in the mix. But when comparing noise normalized performance against the old Pure Loop and the Pure Wings 2 fans, the adoption of RGB here does appear to result in slightly worse performance, so there's a little bit of a compromise here. These newer Light Wings fans do appear to be a less optimized fan for a radiator, and at the higher +3.0 dBA noise level, more or less the same position. But interestingly, despite a nearly 350 RPM increase here, there wasn't too much of thermal improvement, similar to what we see here with the old Pure Loop unit and the Pure Wings 2 fans, and we are still trailing that older Pure Loop by a little on the noise normalized basis. So likely the sweet spot for optimal noise to thermal performance is somewhere between the 1450 and 1800 RPM levels, and the OC3700X is drawing about 97 watts, just to give you a reference point for what the 240 version should be able to handle. It's not exceptional, it's absolutely not too bad at all. One thing I definitely noticed was the pump was quieter than the version that supersedes, which is a great thing since it absolutely did not have an audible hum anymore. And although the previous one, it wasn't terrible as some questionable Asetek pumps that I've dealt with in the past, this one, definite improvement. And here, Be Quiet allows you to adjust the PWM level, but I don't think you really need to. And as you'll see in the sound samples, the noise profile of the pump, it's really polished. And I think if you really want to, you absolutely could just let it run at 100% the whole time, although I did throttle it back to 90% just because. The fans, they do go up to 2500 RPM, but you're absolutely going to want to stay at around 60 to 70% of the max. And if you do need higher performance, then I think you're better off looking at the 280 and the 360 millimeter versions of this as well, provided your case fits it. So let's take a quick listen to the fans at a few selected intervals and then the pump as well. Okay, so Pure Loop 2 FX, I think this one is mostly an improvement, especially in the pump noise department. And even if you don't want the RGB, that better pump noise profile, and the fact that it's controllable, I think it's mostly going to offset the slightly worse noise normalized performance. But one thing you do get with this is also the extra clutter from the RGB cables. And one thing I was really hoping Be Quiet would include here was at least a fan splitter cable, like they included with the older version, so you can connect two fans to the one header. If not, also an RGB splitter or daisy chainable type of RGB cable, like plenty of ARGB fans have these days. The reason being, I think plenty of users are going to want to hook this up directly to the motherboard versus using the fan or LED hub, which needs SATA power, and you're gonna have to run a SATA power cable, which a lot of folks don't do these days because of the M.2, and you're also gonna have to mount that hub apparatus somewhere in your case as well, so that's gonna have to take extra planning and extra space. If you do want to hook it up to your motherboard directly, just be aware you're gonna have to supply a few extra cables. But yeah, otherwise I think this one is a good way to celebrate a 20th anniversary. Price-wise, I am told that some retailers are going to be running up to a $30 off promotion while supplies last, and given that the MSRP for the 240mm unit is $130 US, that does bring it down in line with the outgoing Pure Loop, and that kind of pricing does put it in line with the other mainstream AIOs in its class. With at least for me, the most important feature here still being that inline pump for flexibility and user serviceability. So that'll do it for this one. I hope you found this one helpful. Please give a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I will have links down below when available, and thanks for watching today.